Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have an important healthcare update, infectious disease. We're going to talk about Lyme disease. It's out there, and it can be dangerous. But first, the story of an immigrant, a legal immigrant, a refugee from Vietnam, and her success story. We have more of them coming. As they say, let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we decided on Pennsylvania Newsmakers this week, we're going to take a break from politics. We're not going to talk about the impeachment of President Trump. We're not going to talk about the legalization of marijuana in the state. Who knows? We could get to that. But I think we have an important subject, Lyme disease and other infectious diseases. These are very important, and we have a significant healthcare update from the Pennsylvania Medical Society. But first, I thought it would be a great idea to focus on an immigrant who was an asylum seeker back in the 1970s, who's now a very successful teacher. And this is the history of the United States. Immigration, I'll point out, legal immigration. I'm not going to get into the debate about illegal versus legal. Legal immigration and the success story. That's how literally all of us got here. Well, except for Native Americans, but we'll get to that at another time. Sitting across from me is Lei Williams. She's an English as a second language teacher in the Eastern Lancaster County School District. Put another way, she's at Garden Spot High School. Did I get that right, Lei?
Yes, you did.
All right, well, let's go to your personal story, and it's quite amazing. Let's go back to the mid-1970s. What happened to you?
Well, prior to 1975, I remember having a very happy childhood in Vietnam. As a young child, I didn't know that, war was going on in my country, but in 1975, things changed for our family, and in January of 75, my father passed away, and I remember thinking that we were no longer safe and secure without him there, and my mom knew that keeping two Amerasian children in Saigon was also not safe. So in April, Air America personnel who were still working in the country.
Who's that?
That's my sister and me in Saigon.
And are you the little one or the
I'm
littler
the one? I'm in the blue. I'm in the blue. Yeah.
Little and littler,
Yep.
Right? Go ahead.
Yeah, so my mom knew it wasn't safe to keep us in Saigon, and so Air America was making arrangements for evacuation sites using buildings and helicopters, and so my mom took us to one of those evacuation sites and handed my sister and me to an American, but she was not able to get out.
So the Viet Cong were threatening Saigon, and you have something here that's really, really different. I've never heard this. You talked about abandoning cars, bicycles, and personal belongings. They're all along the road. And William said, "Dead road." What was that about?
Yeah, my mom. The road that this building, this evacuation site was on, probably thousands of Vietnamese were there trying to get out of the country on April 29th, and people who got out just abandoned their cars, or they couldn't take suitcases of possessions with them, and they just left them on the street. And so the Vietnamese call that Dead Street. So you
ended up you took a boat to our country. Where did you land?
Well, we sailed to Guam, and I think I don't have a lot of memories of that time.
I understand.
But I think they gave us all of our shots. And then we sailed to, I think, through Camp Pendleton, and then eventually got to Camp Chaffee in Arkansas, where I was in a refugee camp for 6 weeks.
Okay, now, it took, as you accurately point out, it took 23 years until you got united? What's that? What was that? I mean, this has to be incredible.
Right.
Go ahead, tell the story.
Yeah, growing up in Nebraska with my adopted family, I always had visions of my mom, and I always had this desire to find her. And so through a lot of different events that happened, I was able to get an address of the home where we lived, and I wrote a letter to this address, and sure enough, my mom was still living there. So in 1998, my sister and I went back to Vietnam, and we were reunited with my mom.
Wow.
At that
How
time.
did you get to Lancaster County?
My husband's job.
Oh,
so
okay.
we moved around a lot with his job and career, but then he came here for his job, and this is where we've raised our family.
So you're in Pennsylvania now?
Since 1995, yeah, we've lived.
That's a fairly long time.
It is, but in that time we've lived in China for a year, and we lived in Ethiopia for 2 years, so kind of in and out.
All right, let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about how your experiences not only shaped your life, but how it's been an important component in your job as a teacher. We'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, we're talking about an amazing life story of a refugee from Vietnam who came to our country. We're chatting about her life, and she ended up her early experiences in our country and then ultimately as a teacher in Lancaster County. So how did your early experiences, I should say we're talking to Lei Williams, I better introduce you again, even though it'll be up on the Chiron. How did your experiences earlier in your life get you into teaching and get you into what is now your life's work?
Well, I remember in 2002, I was a substitute teacher, and I did a job in an English as a second language class, and a young student was struggling with his assignment, and he just said, "This is so hard." And I remember looking at him and just telling him, I understand what you're going through, because I had to learn English too.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and so he looked up at me and our eyes connected and he smiled at me, and I knew at that moment that this is what I wanted to do, with my career and as a calling, and so I got my ESL certification.
Did you go to a college to do that?
Yes, I went. Well, I got my elementary education degree at University of Southern Indiana, and then I got my ESL certification through the IU13. Okay,
so you went through the formal process of education, and then your experiences helped you. Did you know that this is what you wanted to do? I mean, obviously you're now involved in what we often call English as a second language, but you take it.
Yeah, I share my story with the kids to give them hope. And I say, if I can do this, then you can do it too. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of hard work. But there are many people here who will support you. And in time, you will be able to help others as well. I often tell the kids to be givers and not just takers. And they can do that after they work hard here.
And you've had trips back to your country. Have you taken students on these trips?
Yes.
This must be really, go ahead.
Yeah, so at our school at Garden Spot, a history teacher, Mark Lehman, wanted to...
Is that it?
There's a group of
They're
us...
all in green. Is that the school colors?
It is not. It's a tour company that we used. Vietnam School Tours helped us arrange the tour, but... we tie this trip into
There's more pictures,
and this is in front of the Reunification Palace in Saigon.
Oh my gosh.
Which is now Ho Chi Minh City. But we tie our stops in with our curriculum in American history. We do service projects, and they engage in the culture, and we take a cooking class. So
That's fabulous.
Yeah, and we work in an orphanage with kids who've been affected by Agent Orange.
Another, so is that the orphanage?
It is, yep. A lot of these kids have been affected by Agent Orange. And so we got to spend the day feeding them and massaging their muscles and just spending time.
Now, what's fascinating about this is at the college level where I'm employed, we do trips all over the world. We take students and, lots of great learning experiences. Is this common you took students, right?
Yes.
You'd had to probably sign 8,000 waivers, right, to get the students
we didn't
to
lose
get
any
permission.
of them. Yep.
So, talk about that.
The parents know, I think, the value of having their kids travel abroad. Traveling internationally opens their eyes to so many different things, and I think it makes them grateful for what they have here in this country, and to recognize that not all young people have the opportunities that they have is huge. And then also with our service learning, we partnered with a local Vietnam veteran this year, and we were able to distribute 15 wheelchairs, something that he does on his own, but we got to partner with him, and so the students got to be a part of that.
So you primarily go to Vietnam, South Vietnam?
Yes. Well, we do the whole country. We start in Hanoi.
I know you can do that now, right?
You can do that now. So we do the whole. We start in the north, go to the Da Nang in the central part, and then go to Saigon.
So
and
you get the students immersed in the culture, so they understand the culture.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, does that bring back? Well, you didn't have a lot of personal memories of it, but is there a little nervousness when you do that?
Yeah, sometimes, the students got to meet a North Vietnamese soldier who invited us into their home, and so the kids are, hearing both sides of the conflict, and they engaged fully in the experience.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. This has been a great interview. All right, now we're going to turn to infectious diseases. This is a very, very important healthcare update. We're going to talk about Lyme disease. It's out there, and as I indicated before, it can be dangerous. And the folks from the Pennsylvania Medical Society are going to help explain why that's important and what you should do about it. We'll get to it.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, as I indicated earlier, we're staying away from politics. We're going to give you a break from all of the politics that's dominating the news, and now we're going to do an important healthcare update with Dr. Danae Powers. She's the president of the Pennsylvania Medical Society, and Dr. John Goldman. He's an infectious disease specialist, and we've been hearing an awful lot about Lyme disease, so we're going to get into that. What is it? What can be done to deal with it? How do you protect yourself? What are the signs and symptoms? I'm going to talk to our specialist here. All right, Dr. Goldman, first of all, what is Lyme disease? Let's start with the basics.
Basics is Lyme disease is a disease you get from ticks. It's been increasing in Pennsylvania. 20 years ago, we almost never saw it in the central Pennsylvania. It was almost always in the eastern part of the state. Over the last 20 years, it's both increased and it's gone throughout the entire state. Currently, you can find Lyme in every county in Pennsylvania.
Now, do you run into that in your...
Oh, absolutely. We see patients with Lyme, treated for Lyme. Patients are now very sophisticated about knowing that they've had it and mentioning it when you get their histories.
Wow. Well, what do you do to protect yourself?
Well,
help our viewers out. What should we all be doing, doctor?
First of all, Lyme is typically during spring and summer.
Okay.
Because it comes from ticks, you should be aware that you should avoid ticks during that time.
Avoid ticks. I don't go around picking them up, do you?
I try not to. The ways you can do that are, if you're outdoors, check yourself for ticks, wear light colored clothing so that you see them, or wear insect repellent. The problem is that even if most people who have Lyme disease don't remember being exposed to a tick. So what I think is most important is just simply be aware that it might be there. So any fever, with or without a rash, during the summer months, Lyme should at least be considered.
Now, do we still have it in the fall? I mean, we've had a fairly mild, we're not into fall here?
I think we see it throughout the year, but as Dr. Goldman will tell you, there's a time when it tends to be much higher in incidence.
Much higher.
And I can tell you, I see patients who have it who didn't know they have it, and they go into the long-term sequela, and a lot of them are very sick.
So what are the signs and symptoms?
So typically, classic Lyme is a bullseye rash.
A bullseye rash.
So a rash that looks like a bullseye. It's clear in the center. The problem is that a certain percentage of Lyme has just a nonspecific rash. A certain percentage of Lyme has fevers without a rash. What I tell people is that any summer flu, you should consider Lyme. The other issue is, at the stage where there's just a bullseye rash or just a fever, the testing is not reliable.
Whoa.
So I treat a lot of people empirically. I say, okay, it's the summer. I know that this is when Lyme occurs. You have a fever. I'm not sure that this is Lyme, but I'm going to treat you for Lyme or other tick-borne illnesses. One of the things you should not do is wait for testing at the stage when someone has a rash, at the stage where someone just has a fever.
But there is effective treatment for it, correct?
There's very effective treatment. If you're given the stage you just have a fever or the stage that you just have a rash, if you're given given 2 to 3 weeks of antibiotics, the cure rate is more than 95%.
Now, why would there be bills in the legislature involving Lyme? I mean, what's that about?
There's controversies within Lyme. So, for example, there are people who believe that long-term antibiotics, particularly IV antibiotics, work. I'm a member of the Infectious Disease Society of America. We strongly believe that long-term antibiotics not only don't work for Lyme disease, but expose patients to unnecessary risks. Putting in an IV and keeping it in for 6 months to the year can cause blood clots, infections of the line, and when it's been studied, it doesn't work. On the other hand, there are patients who strongly believe that the only way they were cured was through these long-term antibiotics.
So what's the legislation do exactly?
The legislation is really to mandate payment for the long-term antibiotics. Most insurance companies will not pay for long-term antibiotics currently.
Well, I mean, if you have a problem like that, why shouldn't it be covered? I mean, is it me or am I?
Well, there's a couple issues. One is the medical society is generally against treatment being mandated by legislation. We feel that that's something doctor-patient.
I get that.
And then with the controversy about how effective it really is and the negatives, we're not sure we want to do anything that pushes a process that may not be possible. And there's another thing, for instance, they're asking for CME, all doctors to take CME on Lyme disease to get licensed. And I say to people, you do not want me taking care of your Lyme disease. As you can understand from Dr. Goldman,
this guy,
it's
right?
tricky, it's complicated. You need someone who knows what to do, understands the testing.
All right.
So,
you also have to remember, I'm an infectious disease specialist. Essentially, I make my living giving people antibiotics.
Yeah.
The only incentive I have to not give someone long-term antibiotics is I think it doesn't work, and I think it may harm them.
Wow. All right, well, we're going to run to a break. We talked about this before, Dr. Powers, but I want to bring it up again because it has to do with prior authorization. It's a central question in healthcare now, and it needs to get resolved in one way or another. We'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, we're chatting about a couple of very, very important healthcare subjects. We did Lyme disease now. The whole business of prior authorization before you can get treatment by a medical specialist is really important. And Dr. Powers, I'm going to start with you. Let's go through the basics. What is prior authorization?
It's a policy that has been put in place by insurers to try to limit unnecessary testing and expenses and procedures. But what it has done is said that in order for a doctor to treat a patient, recommend something, they have to, in many, many cases, go to the insurance company first and get it approved before the patient can enter the treatment program.
Well, so that delays. So if our friend here, Dr. Goldman, wants to treat someone and he doesn't have prior authorization, but it's serious, Does that make any sense to you on any level?
It doesn't make sense to me on any level. And the other thing that it puts patients at risk for is if they have to see me, they see me, and it's then not authorized. They're on the hook for the bill.
Yeah. So the other obvious question is, it delays patient care. So what can you physicians do to minimize the effects of that?
Well, one of the things obviously we look at is legislation. And there's going to be a bill introduced shortly by Representative Stephen Menser of Lancaster County that is going to try to legislate some improvements in the prior authorization process so that patients will not bear the brunt of negative outcomes because they had to go through something through a prior authorization process. And I can tell you what some of the details of that bill are if you would like to get into it.
Just a couple quickly.
Basically, that there's standardized information available for doctors. There's a deadline on when the response has to be made. They cannot retroactively revoke something that was approved, that the doctor making the decision on the approval is actually the same specialty as the doctor requesting the approval, which is a real problem. I mean, the way it is now, I, an anesthesiologist, could be making decisions on infectious disease requests, which is not appropriate.
In your case, you get a patient, and you just talked about Lyme disease, and long-term, can it take a while to get that approved, and then the person suffers?
It can take a couple of weeks to get it approved, depending upon the insurance company, depending upon the requirements for paperwork. You clearly do not want to delay care with a paperwork process.
And I will tell you one that's particularly tragic is what the Medical Society refers to as fail first. And that is a process whereby the prior authorization protocol says you have to go through certain steps.
Right.
And there are many instances where the doctor knows that the steps required will not help the patient. A particularly tragic one is cancer. I know that this drug will not help you with your cancer, but you're required to walk through a process of failing first. And some of these fail first protocols actually then put the patient at risk of not responding when they do get the appropriate treatment. So one of the things, again, that is our policy that this legislation will address is fail first protocols need to be approved by a panel of medical experts. So the medical experts have to agree that this fail first protocol is appropriate.
I mean, it seems obvious to me that the insurance companies and the physicians have to work together, that obviously we have to be careful that, you know, what's being done is proper and that the insurance companies are being, I mean, you know, they're the people who own those companies and put the money in have to be, you know, they have to be protected on their side from fraud and abuse. But on the other hand, you're in the field dealing with the patients, doctor, right?
Absolutely. We're the ones who actually see the patients. We see them firsthand. We're not doing it by computer.
And we're not against prior authorization. We need it improved. We need the process made more appropriate.
We're almost out of time, but you have a place where delayed, you know, care, prior authorization, they can tell their story by going to www.pa Medical Society.
Great, our website, absolutely.
All right, there you have it. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.
Jumping in.